So today it's my pleasure to talk with Kay Holekamp. She's at Michigan State University, where she's a professor in the department. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
Don't worry.
In the Department of Integrated Biology, Program in Ecology, Evolutionary Biology, and Behavior. I don't know if this is like other universities where they kind of have a zoology or biology department and they kind of expand it to include other things and foster collaborations, interdepartmental collaborations. But is that the way that happened up there?
Well, Michigan State, was founded in the 19th century and was set up as a bunch of taxonomic units to study animals or plants or, insects. Anyway, so it's been hard to get away from that sort of taxonomic orientation at Michigan State. So we developed the ecology and evolution and biology and behavior program specifically so there would be a community of people, like-minded people who were actually interested in those topics.
Yeah, they've done that. University of Iowa, they did that. I was at Iowa State University as an undergraduate and a zoology major, as I understand, were you?
Yes, I was a double major in biology and psych.
I wanted to be a veterinarian and was too dumb to get into veterinary medicine school. So on hindsight, though, I'm kind of happy I didn't. My younger brother's a veterinarian, and I don't know, I like being a scientist and kind of using the brain every day.
Me too. It's fun. I like solving puzzles.
Yeah. Okay. And Kay's, she's well known for her work on spotted hyenas in Africa, which what we're going to talk about today. Her work that's provided insight into their intelligence and their social behaviors, mostly from observational studies, but more recently from actually doing experiments with hyenas. And she's received a number of awards, but one of the most prestigious one is she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is very nice recognition of her contribution. So let's get right into your work and the questions I'll pose to you. So when did you become interested in animal behavior? As an undergraduate, I guess?
Actually, even before that, my parents both loved animals and we always had them around. And my mother in particular is very tolerant of me going out and finding, 10 box turtles and keeping them in a little pen in the yard for a summer and then letting them go again. And, I've been interested in them for a long time. But then when I was in high school, I actually started working at the St. Louis Zoo. And that convinced me I would really like a career involving animals and animal behavior.
Oh, nice. Okay. And so looking back on PubMed at your publications, some of your early research, or your earliest, I think, in terms of publication was in ground squirrels. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I did my own PhD work on the problem of why it is that young male mammals typically leave home and go somewhere else before they breed and the females stay home. And there were a number of different hypotheses that have been put forward in the literature, the most popular of which were either they're going in search of food or they're being aggressively driven out of their natal territories. And so I had a whole crew of undergraduate assistants and we'd go out, and it's nice to work on these ground squirrels, much more tractable animals than spotted hyenas, that's for sure. And they're only out, during the academic summer, which is perfect. So they hibernate the rest of the year. And so it's very convenient. And I had seen Paul Sherman give a talk on these creatures and I had planned this really nice dissertation project, but I didn't have the right animal yet. I'd been working on these nocturnal rodents that lived in thickets and that was clearly not the right creature. So I saw Paul Sherman give this talk and these ground squirrels lived in golf course-like meadows in the high Sierra Nevada, which is one of my favorite places on earth. And so I ended up working on them just near where Paul Sherman did, actually, near Yosemite National Park.
And what was your kind of major take-home messages from your work on the ground?
Well, the popular hypotheses weren't correct. And So what I found was that during the course of ontogeny, males go through a series of phases where they become relatively bold and they start exploring their environments. And if you expose young females on the day of birth to a dose of testosterone, you can make them disperse too. So it's as though this early androgen exposure sets a switch in the nervous system such that behaviors start to change over the course of ontogeny. And then if the young male makes it to a particular body mass by a particular date in the season, because you don't want to start dispersing when it's about to, have 6 feet of snow up there. So if the androgen exposure seems to set something like a switch in the nervous system to actually trigger this dispersal behavior later in life.
Huh. Wow, has others kind of followed up on that and try to get more at exactly what's going on in the brain?
No, we haven't done anything with the brain per se. We've looked at hormones and, we actually took a device out there that allowed us to monitor body fat in these squirrels because they go from very scrawny and emaciated when they come out of hibernation in the spring to enormously robust little fat animals before they go into hibernation. So it was, that's how we figured out. It was one of my former students, Scott Nunes, who's now at the University of San Francisco, who figured that out.
Okay, so let's get into the spotted hyenas. How did you get involved studying spotted hyenas?
Well, yeah, that was an odd story. My ex-husband and I had been on safari we actually hitchhiking across the African continent in the mid 70s. And, he knew that animal behavior was one of my main interests. And so we specifically went out of our way to rent a little vehicle and drive around national parks in Kenya and Tanzania. And when we were in Ngorongoro Crater, I saw a whole group of hyenas from afar chasing an adult wildebeest, and they chased it for a long time and eventually killed it right next to our car. And I turned to Rick and I said, wow, I thought those things were skulking carrion eaters, and look at that, they just killed this wildebeest right before our eyes. And he said, yeah, I thought so too. And so I came home and started reading about them, and I was interested in them, but I never imagined I'd actually have an opportunity to go back and study them. And then just as I was finishing my PhD, one of my primary mentors at Berkeley, Steve Glickman, actually got funding from the National Institutes of Health to set up a big captive colony of these creatures. And so I was doing a postdoc on a different ground squirrel species at the University of California at Santa Cruz. And I went up one day to have lunch with Steve after he'd had these animals in captivity for a couple of years. And he said, it's the strangest thing. In the wild, female spotted hyenas are always socially dominant to males, but in the captive situation, even though they're now fully adult animals, males are just as likely to dominate females as vice versa. And I said, that's fascinating. And he said, wouldn't it be cool for somebody to go out and study social development in these creatures in Africa? And I said, yeah, that'd be awesome. And he said, I thought you'd be a good person to do it, because I did a field project for my PhD, and Steve was not a field guy, but he was very impressed that I could pull off a field project of dispersal in the Sierra Nevada. So he thought I'd be a good person to do it. And I said, wow, where do I sign? I wanted to do something like that since I was about 6 years old. And he said, hey, you just need to write an NSF grant and go do it. And so it wasn't quite that simple, but that's ultimately what happened.
That's great. The NIH, my postdoc work was on snails and looking at development of the brains of snails.
Cool.
And over the years, so back in the 70s, 80s, the NIH was much more open-minded in funding basic research that didn't necessarily have any obvious direct clinical applications, but over the years, unfortunately, they've become more disease focused, which I think is not a good idea. A lot of important findings come from people just kind of poking around, trying to understand interesting phenomena in biology.
Yeah, I was actually asked to step off an NIH training grant that Mark Breedlove was the principal investigator on here at Michigan State. And the reason, so was Jenny Bauman, who works on, she works on fish. And so we were told that we can't learn anything about human health from hyenas or fish, so go away. But, we actually know that hyenas can actually eat carcasses laden with anthrax and not die. We've seen them get bitten in the face by a huge forest cobra, and they're sick for a couple of days, and then they're fine. They have immune function that's just out of this world, and we don't understand why. So I think there's a lot we could conceivably learn about hyenas, about human health from hyenas.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you you and your students spend a lot of time in Africa. And how, from a kind of a practical standpoint, what's a typical day like? How do you collect data? Do you videotape the animals and look at the recordings, or do you take a notebook and write down things where you're watching them? How do you actually study them?
Well, we get up in the dark at about 4:30 in the morning, and by about 5, we just have a cup of tea and then hop in the car and go out and typically use radio collars to find our first hyenas in the dark, because we're working right at the equator. So you literally do get 12 hours of darkness and 12 hours of light. It's very predictable. And then we just move from one group to the next to find out who's doing what. And if we find a particular individual that we were interested to follow for the day, then we stay with it. But more often than not, we're actually just tracking.
Okay, so you anesthetize them, put collars on them, and essentially you can track them by GPS. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, we're starting a new experiment right now that some colleagues in Europe initiated, and we're putting these radio collars on in the summer, I hope, that have not only GPS and VHF transmitters on them, but they also have accelerometers and magnetometers in them, so you can see how the animal's moving in space once you download the data. And the coolest thing is that they have a microphone and soundboard, so they record everything the hyena says or hears during the whole life of the collar. So that's going to allow us to study the role of communication and the cooperative behavior that the hyenas engage in. It's very exciting.
Wow, you get a lot of data that way.
It's overwhelming, in fact.
I was just thinking I'm used to doing experiments, and now I understand you're doing some, but where, we have a group of a couple groups of laboratory animals, and we do a single difference between the two groups, some manipulation, and then we measure something. And it's, for statistics, t-test. The kind of,
it's much easier statistically to deal with, but much more challenging to manipulate and get everything organized in the lab.
Now what, right. So how much time do the spotted hyenas spend hunting on average each day?
Not very long, actually. They travel around a great deal, and I think they're routinely testing groups of antelope, because they don't use stealth to capture prey like the big cats do there. They actually are more like wolves or African wild dogs, insofar as they will rush a group of antelope, stop and watch. If they find one individual who's slow or relatively injured somehow, then they'll start off in a chase, and they can chase these prey animals for miles and miles, because they've just got amazing physiology for cursorial hunting. And we've driven along beside them at about 55 miles per hour, but they spend very little time hunting. Like most domestic dogs and cats, they spend most of their lives sleeping in the shade. So, they get socially active around dawn and dusk in particular, and then they do most of their hunting when it's dark. And I'd guess probably maybe a half an hour per day involved in chasing animals. And
so their eating pattern is, their energy intake then is like intermittent fasting. I mean, and wolves, they may, particularly, in northern climates in the winter, they may go a week or more, a couple of weeks without, and then they eat a lot.
Yeah, hyenas do too.
Okay, so can you talk about the advantages of studying the spotted hyenas? They have a very interesting social hierarchy, and the females are dominant to males and kind of run the show. Can you kind of describe that?
You bet. Yeah, no, they're really interesting societies. Unlike the societies of any other mammalian carnivore, they actually are organized just like the societies of baboons or macaques, except that whereas in those primate societies, males are dominant to females, in spotted hyena society, the females are dominant to males. So yes, they have a very strict, linear, rigid hierarchy in each social group, and a social group can contain anywhere from about 10 to 130 individuals. So very variable across the African continent, and the group size is strictly contingent on how much food is available in a particular habitat.
And talk about the social interactions that you've documented in the spotted hyenas, and also and how they might relate to social interactions in humans.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities, actually. The hyenas engage in regular greeting behavior whenever they come together with somebody they haven't seen in a while. And those are very elaborate, sort of multi-sensory system interactions. And they engage in fantastic maternal behavior. The females do, even though they're masculinized in a lot of respects. Their maternal behavior is not masculinized at all. They're perfect mothers, and they actually reconcile after they have an argument with another hyena, if you will, to repair damaged social relationships, and they cooperate and compete as humans do with people who are closely related to them. And that's what happens in other carnivore societies. But unlike other carnivore societies, spotted hyenas are having to cooperate and compete with lots of people who are genetically unrelated to them altogether. So that's very much like in human society.
And typically, how many other hyenas? Right. So wolves live in packs. Hyenas it's kind of the same general thing, but how many during their lifetime, or how many in the I guess directly genetic related group interact, and then what's the broader interaction?
Well, each social group, which is called a clan, the first guy to go study spotted hyenas systematically came directly from Scotland, and he was able to name them clans. And so we have these social groups in which there are a number of different matrilines, and each mother gives birth to cubs that actually slot into the overall dominance hierarchy immediately below her, because she takes their side in interactions against any hyena that's lower ranking than she is. So in that sense, it's very different in that sense, it's much like what we find in wolf societies, for example, because they're typically all the members of one sex are closely related to one another. And you just don't find that in spotted hyena societies. The males all come in from surrounding clans. They immigrate just like Belding's ground squirrels do. They change groups before they breed. And they come into a new clan, and the average relatedness among these males is basically 0. And then when you look between matrilines, as one of my former students, Russ Van Horn, did, you actually find that the same basically 0 relatedness is true between members of different matrilines. So it's a really interesting situation for comparative study of behavior in particular.
But how many hyenas in a clan typically?
Well, ranges from about 10 in the southern African deserts and they occupy spaces as big as the entire national park I work in Kenya, so 1,500 square kilometers, versus in East Africa, where there's very high densities of prey, we get basically groups of we've actually had one group that had 130 hyenas in it, and then it split into 2 groups as exactly what would happen in a primate society that had become too large for the animals to track one another. I think fundamentally there just got to be too many individuals to feel friendly towards. And
that 1,500 square kilometers, is that the territory of they cover that much territory? In the
Namibian deserts, yes, and in various other drier parts of southern Africa, yeah, they actually don't bother to defend territories because there's so few prey and it would be impossible for a clan of 10 hyenas to defend 1,500 square kilometers. So they basically don't engage in any territorial defense or marking or advertisement. Whereas in East Africa, everybody's very, very territorial.
Now I see in reading some of your work, or review articles actually, that the brain size of the spotted hyenas is larger than other hyenas species. And is there a correlation between the brain size and the territory that the species cover? This is something I've thought about, brain size and how much territory, and because if you have moved through a larger territory, you have to, it seems like, remember more things in terms of spatial relationships, where prey animals might be at a particular time, and so on and so on. But anyway, is there any correlation?
No, not that we've seen, because the animals that have the biggest territories are the carrion feeding species, the brown and the striped hyena. And they just cover enormous
Okay.
distances when they're foraging, because they're literally looking for little scraps of carrion, anything that they can pick up. Whereas the spotted hyenas actually, typically, when the prey density is high, they'll actually pick up, cooperatively defend and mark, advertise a territory that's on average in our park about 70 square kilometers.
Okay. Okay. So together with your collaborators, Amiel, is that how you pronounce?
Yeah, Amiel, right.
And Errol.
Right.
You recently had an article in Science which describes how the rank of a hyena within their social network is determined by the rank of its mother. Can you describe how you designed this study to come and made conclusions from your data?
Sure. Yeah. No, this is Amiel's a very good modeler, and he started this work when he was a postdoc at Nimbios. Now he's got a faculty position in Israel, and he did another postdoc with Errol, and they're really great modelers of social evolution, if you will. And so they asked if they could use our hyena data set to try modeling the inheritance of entire social networks. And so we knew from our earlier work with spotted hyenas that through an extended learning process, much like what you find in young baboons or macaques, young hyenas acquire the ranks that are immediately below their mother's ranks, and they maintain those ranks as long as they live in the natal clan. So what Errol and Amiel did was to actually do very sophisticated computer modeling, simulation modeling, where they actually inquired whether the social networks of an adult female were acquired by their offspring, and if so, how long did those social networks ties endure that were the same as the social networks of the mothers. And they found that yes, indeed, these animals do inherit not only their mother's ranks, but their mother's entire social networks, and they maintain those same social networks for up to 6 years, even after their mothers are dead. So it's pretty neat to be able to inherit an entire, society, if you will, within a society. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's really, really elegant work.
It really was, yeah.
I really enjoyed that article. So now let's get into intelligence. And what is your working definition of intelligence? And of course, there's kind of a general intelligence. There's this thing called G factor, and then there's sort of intelligence that's more focused. So can you kind of give an overview of that? And then we'll get into the different theories of evolution of intelligence.
Sure, I'm happy to. I actually like the definition that Al Camel suggested a long time ago, which describes intelligence as the processes by which animals or robots or humans, whatever, interact with their environment, and they acquire and retain information about their environments that allows them to make adaptive behavioral decisions. So I like that definition just because it does apply so broadly to animate and even inanimate objects.
It's interesting in you can go online and there's these like intelligence tests, and they generally focus, at least the ones I've done and taken with the same time as my kids and wife to see who's the smartest. They generally, and I seem to be good at this, they focus on like remembering spatial relationships between different objects and things and how things fit together spatially. And spatial relations, we're visual animals. Hyenas, I assume their, vision is a big component of their, anyway, I don't know, that was just like an aside, but let's go ahead and talk about why are hyenas you found that they're particularly valuable for studying intelligence?
Yeah, I was working on spotted hyenas since basically the late 1980s. And a few years into it, I started reading a lot of the primate literature because the spotted hyenas live in a society that really is exactly like what you find in baboons or macaques. And so I had been reading about the evolution of intelligence, which had mainly been worked on by primatologists until that point. But because hyenas live in societies exactly like the societies of these primates, it seemed to me that we could actually test some of the hypotheses that the primatologists had put forward to explain the evolution of intelligence in their monkeys, especially things that actually had to do with social complexity affecting the evolution of intelligence. I think they've been a really great model system for that. They also a great model system for studying other things, but still, I really think this intelligence work is fascinating.
Now there's four major, in the review article that you wrote that I read, you talk about four major hypotheses for the evolution of intelligence: environmental complexity, social cultural intelligence, and cognitive buffer hypothesis. So I've personally, based on our research, looking at the effects of intermittent food deprivation on animals and considering things, for example, that all the early tools that we know of that were invented by humans had to do with acquiring and processing food. I've kind of focused on like food scarcity as being a major driver of evolution, but clearly that brain evolution, that can't explain everything. So could we kind of go through one by one these four hypotheses, starting with the food scarcity would fit into the environmental complexity hypothesis, I assume?
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And the popular name for it these days is the ecological intelligence hypothesis. And it's definitely, it was first suggested by Katie Milton with respect to primates. She was comparing leaf-eating monkeys with monkeys that ate more challenging food to find. And she's the one who originally suggested it with respect to primates, but it's sort of went out of favor for a while, and now it's come back in a big way. And so it just suggests that, big brains and great intelligence evolved to allow animals to cope with finding food, processing food, and remembering where fruiting trees are going to be, for example, and hunting. And so that's right, where tool use would come in as well.
I'm going to have Michael Platt as a guest. You probably know him, and he's done a lot of work on the prefrontal cortex and its role in decision making and foraging, and so we'll talk about that in some detail with regards to the part of the brain that's expanded most during primate evolution and is biggest in humans.
Right.
Of course, hyenas have a prefrontal cortex, I assume.
Yes, they do, actually. Yeah, no, this is some nice work that Charlene Sakai, one of my colleagues here at Michigan State, initiated. She's been interested in carnivore brain evolution for quite a long time. And so here we were trying to test the social brain hypothesis, if you will, which is the neuroscience equivalent to the social complexity hypothesis, which says that great cognitive ability evolves to allow animals to cope with complexity in their social environments, with the rationale being if you can anticipate and perhaps even manipulate the behavior of your group mates, that could generate a huge fitness advantage for you. So we were interested, we had seen a lot of behavioral data that were consistent with that hypothesis, but Charlene wanted to start looking at the brain, and it's very hard to get the brain intact out of a hyena skull, and we didn't have access to hyena brains anyway. So what Charlene did was take a lot of museum specimen skulls and actually put those in a CT scanner, and then use special software called Mimics to recreate in 3 dimensions the virtual endocast, from which she could then measure different volumes of different brain sections. So it's very crude. There's only 4 sections that you can actually see clearly on those 3-dimensional virtual brains. And that is, there's a posterior part, which is the cerebellum and brainstem. And then we have in the very front of the brain of a carnivore, we have olfactory bulbs. And then there's this cerebrum in between those two units. And so Charlene divided that into basically prefrontal cortex, which is divided, and she divided it. She looked at it histologically and determined where the cell types change. And then, so that's the anterior cerebrum, and then the posterior cerebrum contains a lot of brain areas, obviously. So then she could actually inquire about the overall volume of this endocast, how big the overall brain size was relative to the size of the skull, from which it came. So you correct for that, of course, which is the same as correcting for body size, only I consider it to be considerably more precise. And so we started off looking at spotted hyenas, and then we compared those to the 3 other extant species in the same hyena family. Hyenas form their own family within the carnivores, and they're actually, surprisingly to most people, more closely related to cats than to dogs. There are 3 other species: the brown hyena, the striped hyena, and those are the 2 I mentioned earlier that feed on carrion. And then the 4th hyenid species that's still extant on the surface of the earth is the aardwolf, which is the only remaining individual species from a once very large clade of dog-like hyenas that are occupied for many millions of years all of Asia, Africa, and Europe. So until the actual canids made it there, and then they outcompeted the hyenas, obviously. But yeah, so we compared the overall brain volume in these 4 species and the frontal cortex volume. And what she found was, yeah, the spotted hyenas have overall a much larger brain than the others. And then we found that the frontal cortex volume was, it looked like it was very directly related to the complexity of their societies, because the spotted hyenas have a great huge one, and then the brown and the striped hyenas, which both live in very simple small societies, have intermediate sized brains. And then the aardwolf, which feeds exclusively on termites and lives mainly alone, has the tiniest brain. But that relationship of the various prefrontal cortex is also consistent with the feeding hypothesis, that you mentioned initially, which is that spotted hyenas are the only living hyena that actually chases live prey. The 2 other bone cracking forms, the striped and the brown, feed on carrion mainly, and the aardwolf eats bugs. So it's very consistent with both hypotheses. So that was unsatisfying. So then we did a much larger.
In a little bit, we're going to talk about the hyenas you have up there, right? At Michigan State. You have hyenas?
No, I don't have any hyenas here, no.
Oh, what? You've done some work with hyenas in captivity?
Yeah, and that was with Steve Glickman's captive colony at Berkeley before that was disbanded.
I see.
Yeah, so they.
And that's no longer. They don't no longer have that colony?
That's right, because as you said, NIH decided that we can't learn anything about people from hyenas, so they stopped funding the project, which is really sad.
Gosh. Yeah, I was thinking, oh my gosh, that's too bad. Yeah, because then so like if you had spotted hyenas at Michigan State, you wouldn't need many. They have a veterinary medicine school there.
Yeah, they do.
And they probably have do they have an MRI they use for?
Yeah, they've got a big MRI.
Right, and then I
know that would really be cool.
You could anesthetize the hyenas and do MRI, look at size of the hippocampus and this and that. And
I know, I think it would be so cool to do that. Yeah, they never did any of that with the Berkeley hyenas, but yeah, nobody, tell you what, that's really expensive operation. So nobody's going to be starting another captive.
It is, yeah, I understand that. We had a rhesus monkey colony at NIH, and it's yeah. Okay,
yeah, expensive.
So let's go talk about the social, well, you've kind of touched on it already, but social complexity hypothesis, you kind of already.
I talked about that one a little bit. Yeah, saying that, this is the one that suggests that we have big brains and great intelligence in order to primarily anticipate and manipulate the behavior of our group mates, because that would give us such a big fitness advantage. And it's certainly true that the animals with the biggest brains typically live in complicated societies, but there's a lot of data that are not consistent with that hypothesis as well. And there's this fundamental discussion in the intelligence literature about whether intelligence is modular, because theoretically, you have a part of the brain that focuses on getting food and processing it, and another part of the brain that deals with, or parts of the brain, plural, that deal with, social complexity. But then where does general intelligence come from? So there's all these interesting questions about the evolution of intelligence that some of these hypotheses just don't do well explaining.
Next week, I'm going to talk with Nikki Clayton.
Oh yeah, she does really nice work with birds.
Yeah, and I'll try to remember to ask her about because she doesn't really study like you, really, the social interaction so much, except one bird with another. So I'll ask her. So crows, family birds, have large brains relative to a lot of other birds, but I don't know about the social, how big their social networks are compared to others. So I'll ask her about that.
Yeah, no, I think that'd be a really, really fun thing to talk to her about, because yeah, she does very elegant experimental work with these birds, and just fabulously elegant, I think.
Okay, cultural intelligence hypothesis.
Yeah, that's very much like the social complexity hypothesis, except it focuses specifically on the social transmission of information within and between generations. So it says that the animals that are going to have the biggest brains and the greatest intelligence are those that have a slowly unfolding onto genetic development, where you have a lot of opportunities to actually watch other members of your society do things and learn how to use tools and so forth from your mom, as we've seen, chimpanzees doing in West Africa, for example. And this is mainly championed by Karel van Schaik at the University of Zurich. And he's a really great mind, and worries a lot about the evolution of general intelligence in particular, because there's a good question: where does that come from? Coincidental animals do very well in social complexity, also seem to be doing very well in other types of tasks as well.
So when the hyenas die, right? Some of them are going to die during the course of your studies. Mm-hmm. Can you not get to them quick enough to get their brains out and put in formaldehyde?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we're lucky if we get to them within a few hours, and we're right at the equator. It's super hot, so that the decomposition starts immediately.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's go to your favorite hypothesis, which after reading your thoughts on it, I kind of agree with, the cognitive buffer hypothesis.
Yeah, this one's different from the others, and addresses more specifically the question of where general intelligence comes from. What the explanation that historically has been offered about the evolution of general intelligence from both the ecological intelligence hypothesis and the social complexity hypotheses, both of that and the cultural intelligence hypothesis. Excuse me. This one actually suggests that those other hypotheses would all have general intelligence evolving as a side effect, if you will, of selection for the specific thing that the hypothesis talks about. By contrast, the cognitive buffer hypothesis, which is put forward by Daniel Soll and other colleagues of his, suggests that instead general intelligence evolves because there's direct selection on animal to have this general ability, behavioral flexibility that allows them to cope with evolutionary novelty and new problems as they arise. So we've been trying to test that one, and we're using urbanization as a method of having differential exposure to a novel environment. So we've been testing hyenas in 3 different environments on a series of problem-solving tasks, and none of which involve social intelligence at all. They're all, you get food by doing various things. And we're testing the hypothesis in 3 different populations of hyenas, one that lives in an environment that's totally pristine, much like the hyenas experienced back in the Pleistocene. Another is a rapidly urbanizing part of Kenya near a national park, where a town is growing at phenomenal speed. And so the hyenas have only been exposed to this for a generation now. And then finally, we're testing it in hyenas in the city of Mekelle in Ethiopia, which is in the northern part of Ethiopia. We had to stop it because of the civil war in Ethiopia, mind you. But what we were doing prior to that was testing hyenas in this city where something like 800 hyenas walk up and down the streets with 350,000 people, which is pretty amazing. And they've been doing this for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And so, that's sort of a stable, they should have theoretically now adapted to the life in the city. These animals that are just starting to experience exposure to a city, and these animals that are in this pristine environment that don't get any exposure to any kind of urban life. And so we've been testing the hyenas, and so far the hyenas in the urban environment in Ethiopia are by far the dumbest. So it's really amazing. I think, looks like maybe hyenas were able to invade the city because they were pre-adapted, with the kind of behavioral flexibility that allows you to survive well in cities. And it's really interesting what's happening. They're actually turning into a whole different species before our eyes. If you look at photos of those city hyenas, they're much shorter and flatter, if you will. So they don't have that same adaptations for cursorial hunting, because all they live on in the city is rubbish. They go through these giant garbage dumps and find, leftover food in those and eat that. They don't even, I've seen some footage that one of my former students, Lily Johnson Ulrich, took. She was doing this cognition testing in Ethiopia, and she's got footage of a group of hyenas walking along a dirt road at night, and they encounter a donkey going the other direction. Now, the hyenas I work with in Kenya would immediately tear that donkey to pieces and wouldn't think twice about it. These hyenas just walked right by it. I mean, they didn't view it as a prey object. It was just stunning to me how different they are than the hyenas.
I hope our human brains aren't, I hope we're not getting dumber for living, and
the people are handling this vaccination situation makes me wonder. It's really crazy.
There are a few studies based on measuring skull volumes that suggest that the overall size of the human brain has gotten about 10% smaller since before the agricultural revolution, when we were hunter-gatherers and moving through our environment and having to think about, which is kind of what you're talking about, I think, with urbanization. And then there's evidence that I saw at least one paper from a group in Germany where they compared the brain size of wolves in the wild to species of domesticated dogs with the same body size, and the domesticated dogs have smaller brains. So, this is a big evolutionary change. I mean, it's happening just like that.
I know, it's incredible. It's happening so fast. Yeah.
But clearly humans, we're able to specialize. We're becoming specialists. We can focus on one little thing, but maybe our general intelligence, I don't know, maybe it's going down.
Yeah, I don't know either. It's a little worrisome though, because the hyenas that perform best on all our cognition tests so far are the ones out in the pristine environment where they're really, having to survive completely on their own. Nobody's putting any trash out for them to feed on.
There's been some studies, and we helped a little on some of these in rodents, rats and mice, in a laboratory setting, that if you raise them in what we call enriched environments, where it's kind of like a playground, big cages, a lot of room, a lot of playground things, that their hippocampus, which is very important for spatial learning,
right,
are bigger. So, yeah. I
understand the hippocampi of taxi drivers in London are also considerably larger than that of
our kid. I think about that every time. I only recently started to use the GPS on my cell phone. I was really good at reading maps when I was young, and I don't know. Okay, so let's. So you and your colleagues are featured in the book "The Hyena Scientist" by the well-known naturalists and authors Cy Montgomery and Nick Bishop. And could you briefly comment on what kind of you learned? Maybe you learned something from them while they were kind of tailing around with you every day.
Yeah, I actually learned a lot from those guys. It was really interesting to see the whole process of how Cy sort of organized the book and how she and Nick interacted to actually get the illustrations that she thought would be, most useful for her story that she wanted to tell. And so I learned, I think, a lot from her about, how you organize those kinds of things. She's just a really wonderful person and clearly loves animals. And, she's done these, a tarantula scientist and a octopus scientist book. She's done a whole wonderful series of books about people who study these different animals, and they're really fun for kids. Kids love these books.
Yeah. Now, are you going to write a book are you writing?
Yes, I'm writing a book right now that I've signed a contract for Springer. I've been focusing on this book for pretty much most of the last year. And it's coming along slowly. But yeah, this one is not, I think, specifically for lay audiences, although I chose Springer because they allow me to have a lot of color illustrations, which I think the color photography really helps people understand what's going on and allows you to actually show them what specific behaviors look like. So anyway, it's going to be well illustrated. So maybe it will be appealing to lay people. It remains to be seen. But then I've started writing another book too, just about Cry of the Kalahari style book for lay audiences about what it's like to be a naive American girl going out to the middle of nowhere and trying to have to figure out how to keep your cars going and your Maasai employees happy, et cetera, et cetera. It's really very challenging.
Yeah. I assume you've seen the movie The Gods Must Be Crazy.
Yeah, I love that one.
Yeah, I love that one too. And that, I don't know, just what you were saying there kind of reminded me of that.
Yes, there are big cultural differences, huge ones, that a lot of which I don't even understand, like, female circumcision. I don't just get where did that come from? It's just crazy. So anyway, there's a lot of big cultural divides there.
Would you hitchhike across Africa nowadays?
I don't think I would. I think hitchhiking used to be a very benign thing to do, but then people started taking advantage of hitchhikers and doing bad things to them. So
that's just the same in this country, right? I mean, in the 1970s, even 80s, pretty safe to hitchhike, and
I know.
people are, yeah.
I was just going to say, Rick, my ex-husband and Rick, we spent a full year just hitchhiking literally across the globe. We took planes across two oceans, and a boat across the third ocean. But otherwise, we were just coming it all across North Africa and down to East Africa. And we went over to Nepal and India and back around to Indonesia and came home from Hong Kong. It was very, very fun trip.
Now, let's finish up by talking about what you're doing now. How many students, and do you have postdocs or mainly graduate students?
Mainly graduate students, and they've really done a terrific job and really risen to the occasion. So I'm moving towards retirement soon. So I'm trying to shrink my lab, and so I'm down from 13 graduate students to only 5. So that's saving me a fair amount of time and letting me write more of my own stuff instead of just constantly reading theirs. But
I retired a couple of years ago from the NIH. I was a lab chief there, and I spent since the 1990s doing all this work on the effects of intermittent food deprivation on the brain, and looking at how it affects neural network activity, what's going on at the cellular molecular level, numbers of synapses, neurogenesis, all this stuff. And then during the course of all this, I got involved in some human studies, and then this kind of got popularized, and now there's like tons of books on intermittent fasting, but none of them are really on the nitty-gritty science of it. So I finally, after I retired, I had time, because when you had 13 graduate students, you don't have time for much else, right? You've got to focus on them. This is their careers, and
absolutely,
you've got to make sure that they have projects that are there's a high probability they're going to get publishable data, and you got to kind of guide them through it, and then typically help them a lot with the writing,
Yeah,
right? Because this
exactly.
is really their first experience writing scientific articles, and there's really
Right.
no time for. So, you know, I think you'll enjoy retirement and have time to. I think, as with most scientists, you'll actually be semi-retired,
Right. I
right?
hope.
You, you'll keep your mind and maybe fingers on the keyboard
I
involved
sure,
in.
yeah, I certainly hope to be able to, because I've got a whole string of books I want to write. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think it'll be nice. You know, you can sit home with your dogs and right. I'm a morning person, so I
Too.
like this whole. I actually have written 2 books now. The other one's at the publisher. It's on. The title is "Sculptor and Destroyer: The Story of Glutamate, the brain's most important neurotransmitter."
Cool.
There's the whole story on that, but I just write in the morning, 3 hours, maybe 4, and that's it. And then the rest of the day, I'm kind of doing other things, and
Yeah,
that,
that sounds like a really good schedule. I want to do that.
yeah. Okay, well, we covered a lot of ground, Kay, and I hope the viewers and the listeners will be interested. Where could we point them? You know, in the future, you'll have a couple of books, but is there anything we can point them to on the internet to get more information? Of course, nowadays they can just Google your name, but is there anything specific they could look at?
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's a lot of information about spotted hyena behavior on Wikipedia that a number of us have put up, so there's a lot of information to be found there that's generally very accurate.
And have you made any videos of the hyenas and then put them up, say, on YouTube?
Yes, there are a bunch of our hyena videos on YouTube. Our main research tools are a pair of binoculars and a left and right side album of spot patterns of each hyena, because that's how we had recognized them individually. And so we get these spot pattern photos by actually turning on a video camera and letting the hyena walk back and forth beside our car. And then we can actually freeze a frame where the hyena is literally at right angles to the plane of the camera and the lens. And so, yeah, we do a lot of videotaping. And then if we're doing a specific experiment, we usually will videotape, like all our cognition trials are videotaped, just so that we can go back and look at them in slow motion, because sometimes a lot of things happen very quickly with these hyenas, especially, since we can't isolate them. So, we try to find them by themselves and give them a cognition test when they're alone, but there's this social element. They live in this society, so other hyenas can wander in and totally blow your experiment, or you can control for that statistically if you're very well trained in these modern statistical methods, because like ecologists and economists, we can't control everything as you can in a laboratory setting, so we have to control things statistically.
All right, Kay. So what I've learned from you, and known a little bit, some of it, we should keep moving physically, go out in the woods, move
Yes.
through the environment. Don't use your GPS.
That's right.
Use your brain and get some physical exercise while you move through and learn things, and maybe your brain will continue to evolve in a good direction.
Or at least not shrink too much.
Yeah, at least not shrink too much. And actually, there's this transgenerational thing too, where I'm actually concerned with the increased incidence, like in the United States in particular, of childhood obesity. That there's data from animals that if you give rats a fast food diet and then you follow them for several generations, this transgenerational, what I'd call metabolic morbidity, couch potato lifestyle
Yeah.
brains are getting smaller and they're not functioning as well. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of concerned about this, that just from a person's daily lifestyle. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's worrisome. I agree.
Okay, Kay, well, your dog was very cooperative.
Yes, she is.
And so, give her an extra treat